to do on a weekly basis? Any idea? What do we tell like our servants who have a Sunday school class? What should you be doing every week? Read the Bible, sure. Absolutely. What else? Praying for the kids. So your kids are your responsibility. Your youth are your responsibility. So we can't take that part lightly. When we say, I want to be a Sunday school teacher, I remember I had this one friend of mine who unfortunately wasn't able to serve. But a big part of his service was, or a big part of why he wanted to serve was he just wanted to be included because everyone else was going to prepare to serve. Everyone else was getting a class. And that's all he wanted to do. He just I want to fit in with everyone else. But he wasn't recognizing the priority, the importance of this. Why are we serving? Why are we doing what we're doing? And so it actually ended up leading to him getting frustrated with the church and then leaving it for a period of time because it's like, I didn't get what I wanted, right? Yep.
On this very important, I don't see this as a failure on your friend's side, but a failure on
No.
the church side.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes. Like they could have involved him more in lots of other ways, but
yeah. And the reason I say that, the comment you made like a couple weeks ago, like how many deacons that you know of, that actually the only purpose of them learning any and you're coming with like almost all of it, right?
Yeah.
So the just want to make sure that we're on.
Absolutely. And that's where we have to look at the law of the student as well, right? Right now, I'm just talking about the speaker. It's you're 100% right. The church should have tried to involve him in one way or another, but keeping in mind that we also have to keep that integrity, right? So if he can't function, let's try to put you in a different service. Let's put you in something else that maybe works for you. But if you don't want that, you want this specific service. I want to be a Sunday school teacher, but that's not what you're called to do, right? And you walk away, that's also on you. Like there's both responsibilities. I 100% agree with you though, that the church has to be able to be more involved. And I know growing up, we didn't have a lot of servants, unfortunately. And that was one of our struggles in our church where we did lose quite a few number of youth because of that lack of service. So then this was part of the results of it. And as we said with the responsibilities, when we talk about prayer, I always love to use the example Pope Kyrillos, man of prayer and miracles. And in the 12 years of the service, again, all he did was pray. And through his prayers, he fixed the broken church. And I'm not sure how many of you have had a chance to really do a little bit of a deeper dive into the life of Pope Kyrillos. Have any of you read the book Silent Patriarch? It's a book called Silent Patriarch. It's a biography on Pope Kyrillos, but had a lot of interesting information that I myself didn't know about. One of the things they were talking about was just how broken the church was. We, as a Coptic community, sometimes like to think our church has always been perfect all the time. It never had any problems. But this book actually, it showed that, there were a few issues in the church, quite a few. And at the point of when Pope Kyrillos took over, an example of the problems in the church was the fact that monasteries were old and decrepit and there were no monks. Like there were monasteries that literally had one or two monks and that was it. Like there was no servants, right? And then Pope Kyrillos comes in and little by little in those 12 years, he transforms the church into what it is now. He fixes a lot of things like simony. I'm not sure if you guys are familiar with that word simony, but it's basically, you want to be a bishop? No problem. How much are you willing to pay? And it's you bribe your way into that position or that rank. So there was a lot of simony going on in the church. There was a lot of corruption in the church in general. And it's Pope Kyrillos, again, he doesn't go in with a big, I'm gonna change everything. Like all he's doing is like, I'm gonna pray because that is my responsibility and that is my service first and foremost. And then little by little, he's taking these actions to slowly fix the church. But it's quite amazing that he understood that responsibility of his, and you would see in his humility in a lot of aspects and also his strength in a lot of other aspects where it's like, this can't go on, or I'm going to make a decision and I've made this decision. Even the decision of like ordaining Pope Shenouda as a bishop. I'm sure you guys might have heard that story. It's Pope Shenouda, bishop, or the monk at the time. He didn't want to be a bishop. He didn't want to be anything. And like Pope Kyrillos kept on trying like Beitayel man, and then in the end he's like, okay, come get my blessing. Just puts his hand on him, just starts saying the ordination prayers right there and then he ordains him because he knew that was what was right for the church. And you know what, we saw what happened. Bishop Shenouda afterwards, he became the Pope. So there is a lot of responsibility, and we can't understate that in our service. So when we talk about the law of the speaker, I always like to point out the biggest part is us being responsible. So we need to have that understanding of responsibility. So when we talk about the law of the speaker, there's prep and presentation. This is something that you should be able to go through as you're preparing. So before we begin, obviously, to prepare, we should always pray. Then we go in the preparation, we need to assess the following of the content. So is it appropriate, accurate, arranged, attractive, and applied? So those 5 A's, they're basically when you're starting to prepare. So if I need to give a lesson on, we'll say, I'm trying to think of something that happened recently. We had actually a servant in my church. They were preparing a lesson. They wanted to show a video. It was a nice video, and I think for a different age group, it would have been perfect. Unfortunately, it was for a younger population, a younger age group. And so this video had a scene where Mary Magdalene shows that she's possessed with a demon, right? A lot of the kids didn't find that interesting. They were scared. And then we got complaints from the parents afterwards that, like, you know, some of their kids were still scared like the whole week afterwards, right? So in this case, was this video appropriate for the lesson topic? Maybe not. Maybe we could have used words, or we didn't have to necessarily show that video for the explanation, right? But a different age group, maybe when they're a little bit older, they might understand this a little bit more. It's easier, right? So it's understanding the appropriateness. Accuracy is very important. When you're being accurate about something, you want to make sure that you don't say something wrong that can end up being passed around on and on and on. I remember this was very scary for me, but a servant was telling me how their kid was in a Sunday school class, and the teacher is trying to explain the body and the blood of Christ. And they're using the terms, oh, it's like body, it's like blood. And that's like, as soon as the kid told the teacher or the parent that, the parent went to the Sunday school teacher, like, it's not like, it is the body and blood of Christ. There is no confusion to be made with that, right? So this accuracy part is very important. And then when you look at the range, attractiveness, and applied, that's also very important for who am I speaking to? So if I'm speaking to a younger youth or maybe an older youth, how am I going to arrange it in a way that can be attractive to them? How am I going to make sure that it can apply to their lives? So that stuff's very important. So that's during the preparation. Once it's prepared, we need to think of how we're going to present it. And that's where you see the different R's. So relevancy, respectfulness, real, relational, riveting, rhetoric, remembering, and resources. So all this is to say is, a lot of times when we're doing our job or when we're serving, we treat it like a job, right? I remember when I was very young and starting off as a servant, very excited to serve and like, yes, it's going to be so much fun. A year in, I start to lose that passion, and it's now, okay, what's Sunday night? What's the lesson about? What's it going to be? Let's make sure I read it quickly, make sure I have some points, and like, okay, I go, and it's now there's almost no love for my service, right? And it showed, because the kids are also losing that, engagement, because I no longer care. So it's very important that, as much as this is a service, we fall into the trap a lot of times of treating it like a job. And we have to be very careful when we're doing that, because we don't want it to be a job. We don't want this to be another thing that you're working on. And sometimes the gift God gives you becomes recognized, and that can also be very dangerous, because if, say, you're a very good speaker, right? Everyone knows that you're a good speaker. I'm going to go to your class, or I want to go to this person's class specifically, or this person's talking. Again, our ego can start to come into play, and this is how the devil works. So he's always trying to, find whatever crack he can come into and open it up a little bit more. So if you're a very good speaker, you might start to let that get to you, and then maybe you don't prepare as much, because, oh, I'm a good speaker, I know what I can say, I don't need to worry about thinking of all this. And that can become very problematic as well, because again, you lose that passion. When you lose the passion, you can lose a lot of your service. And then the other part I always like to say is nothing we use is fully our own material. The Orthodox Church is beautiful because nothing is new, right? Everything has been taught from our church fathers. It's passed down, it's passed down, it's passed down. So because of that, it's also a type of humbling. Like nothing I say is brand new because it's all been said before. But what I can do is I can, make my own little twist, give my own little explanation on the same exact thing, right? Try to make it as relevant as possible. But it's important that I don't just pass it off as my own. I can't go and read St. John Chrysostom's homily and say that I said it myself, because that's not right. And also, I don't have that same passion that he had when he was writing. So I could be saying the exact same thing someone else says, but they have a lot more passion when they say it because they're the ones who wrote it. So part of it is also you preparing so that it becomes more real to you. And have any of you fallen into that problem where it's, you're either you've kind of lost the passion, or maybe you're preparing very late and then you're like, taking someone else's material? Have you ever fallen into that? What happens with you guys? Or has it ever happened? I know it's happened with me personally.
Yeah, the idea of not preparing things.
Mm-hmm.
I've done it many times. Yeah, it becomes so numb, so has no spirit, has no life.
Has no life, absolutely. I know for me, it's when I give sermons, I try to prepare all these different things. I try to listen to other sermons. And I remember my frustration was sometimes I really like the sermon from someone else. And I was like, I want to say exactly what they said. And then I'll try to practice almost reciting it out, but I always notice it's never the same. It was never, ever, ever the same. And it almost bugged me, like, what are they say? How are they saying it so differently when it's the same words? I don't understand. But it's again, part of it is the, I have to also be a little original on myself. So this prep and presentation is very important for our success as well.
There's a piece though where it becomes so, I've said it, that I'm so good at it that it's not lazy anymore. It's just that you're functioning at the high end of your capability. Let's use a basketball example.
Yeah.
Of course, Kobe still goes and shoots threes and all that, but you practice less because knees were hurting, right? So you put in so much work early on that you become so good at it that you need less prep and less that. And I don't think it's egotistical to say I need less prep because I put in so much effort. I think it's just put in so much work early on that you become so good at it that you will need less prep. It's just that that's just because of all the work that you put. You still need to prep, of course. So
Yeah.
You might need, instead of spending an hour, you might spend 10.
So
like, and I don't think that's like egotistical. I think that's just you put in the work, right?
So I would agree to an extent with that, but my other point to this is, and I remember my uncle, he's a priest. He has all his sermons that he's ever given like on paper, and he has them in his little office, and it's like he's now, I don't know how long he's been serving for 20, 30 years. So he has a lot of papers. Something I noticed, he's very good at public speaking, he was very good at that. But the one thing that was unique was, and he would always say, it's like no two sermons are ever going to be the same. Yes, the preparation time might be, I might know where to go. So I know how to get to the books of St. John Chrysostom. I know how to get to St. Cyril. I know how to pick and, grab these material where it might have taken less time. But I think we also have to not forget that every time I give a talk, every time, there's going to be a sermon I might give, it's always going to be different. And it's always going to, when we look at the situations that are going on in this world, it's going to take more time regardless. I agree with you that your flow or your system or whatever you might do, you've become more attuned to it. So it's easier for you to get through it. But I would say with the prep and presentation, you would still need a significant amount of time, we'll say. And when I say significant amount of time, I mean, let's not prepare it again the night before. Maybe I'll start on the Tuesday, I'll have materials, I'll have jotted down the notes, but it's not, like you said, it might not take me an hour to get all the notes down. But I still started Tuesday. I started thinking about it throughout the week. And then by Friday, Saturday, I have it all lined up, however I'm going to do it. There's differences, I guess what I'm trying to say is just because you're good at it doesn't mean that you can afford to leave it till the last minute. Maybe that's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, which practice you that better with the theory. So you're not struggling with this, but the presentation is different each time because each time is different variation. You're delivering. So,
Yeah, and this is where I think it's a
Yeah.
an hour. I'm just using the ratios, for example.
Yeah.
But you still need to prep, of course.
Yeah.
Just that.
Yeah.
I think of kind of flagging it. I don't think it becomes. I guess your approach matters. I don't think it's too difficult to say I mastered my trade.
Mhm.
I think it's humbling to say I've mastered my trade. Yet I still need to prepare. I'll get to the lesson. I'm humble enough to get feedback and all that, right?
Mhm.
So if it's with time, you. I don't think you'll need to spend an hour every time.
Mhm.
Using an hour
Yeah.
once a point, but you would not need to spend an hour. But I don't think it's bad to say I'm not going to spend an hour. But I'm still preparing. Right? Again, that's just a relative.
Yeah,
You have-
well, yeah.
of course, I agree with you. Shouldn't be last minute,
Mhm.
but I think the prep time also will increase with time.
No, that makes
If
sense.
you become more. to your
It's
point that you
easier to
made,
find.
you become a master with your uncle.
In the
You know
theory.
where to look.
Yeah,
So you spend less time accumulating knowledge and more time working on the presentation.
on actual presentation. Yeah.
Don't make it 10 minutes before you deliver. that.
Yeah.
I think that's
That's it.
Don't prep, don't procrastinate.
Don't make it the last 10 minutes before you actually.
Don't procrastinate.
Just because I can. Yeah. So now we talked about the law of the spirit, the law of the teacher. Now we get to the law of the student. And this is my favorite one because this is the one that I used to mess up a lot in my service. So we have to recognize we are communicating to someone who's not ourselves. I might find that I really enjoy stories. That doesn't mean everyone else is going to really enjoy stories, right? I might find them a visual learner. Doesn't mean everyone else is going to be a visual learner. And this part, it can get really frustrating for us as servants because we'll have put in a lot of effort into our preparation and our presentation and whatnot, and people might still not be engaged. The student might not be engaged, and we sometimes forget to put ourselves in the shoes of the student, right? So there's something called teacher-based learning and learner-based learning, and you'll see this again. It's all in the book, but we look at the teacher-based learning. So the primary focus in communication is the speaker. So it means that how am I going to teach? However, I think the speaker or how I myself would like to be taught, right? Whereas learner-based, I'm looking at the students. So if I have a bunch of excited young men, they might not want a calming lesson. They might want something that's more physically active, right? Primary responsibility for learning. Again, teacher-based is what the student needs to listen. The student is the one that it's on them to learn. I've already prepared. I've done my part. Now it's on the student. Whereas the learner-based, it's based on the speaker. The speaker, it's the responsibility of the speaker to make sure that the students are engaged and learning. And the primary goal for a teacher-based learning is to accurately teach the information, whereas learner-based to help the student learn, grow, and apply biblical truth. And so you can go on through all of these, but they're basically, one is where you're expecting the student to do everything or expecting the student to accept everything you give them. And the other one is how can I adapt myself and my teaching? And the reason why, like I said, the law of the student I find so important to me was, again, this was very early on in my service. And I remember I had these two girls in my class that would have these blank stares at me, like just stare as if I'm not doing anything. And I'd say something. I asked them, like, what did I say? And they're just not even responding. I'm like, do you guys hear me? Like, am I speaking a different language or something? And it used to frustrate me. I used to think it was all on them. It's their fault that they're not listening to me. Their fault that they're not getting engaged. And look at this other student. They seem to be really happy and enjoying the lesson. So therefore, it's that student's fault for not paying attention. And again, my problem was a big part of my teaching was teacher-based. I've done my part. I've done my preparation. I think I did a great job preparing the lesson. Therefore, they must love it. If they don't, it's on them, right? And that can become, again, very dangerous because you are alienating some of these students who may need, a different kind of lesson, or they might be engaged in something different, right? And it just becomes very slippery slope, we'll say, because then you start making assumptions about the student. The student's a bad student. The student is not engaged. Maybe their parents aren't teaching them enough about the church. You can make all these assumptions that have nothing to do with anything, just because you see something in your own perspective and because they didn't want to learn how you were teaching. So just the benefits of student-based learning include tailoring to the needs of the student. And I'll use a story about a father of confession. There was this young boy, about 12 years old, loves his milk. So he goes to his father of confession and he tells him, Abuna, and this priest, he was 80 something years old, very fathish. So like barely speaks English. And this young boy tells him, I need to drink my milk. And he comes with a whole like science background. I'm growing, I need calcium and this and that and that and that, and goes through a whole list. Abuna is like, that's very good, Habibi. So I have a question for you. What does the horse eat? Or no, sorry, before I say that. He goes and he tells them, like, is a horse big and strong? It's like, yes. And he's like, does the horse carry like thousands of pounds of weight? It's like, yeah. He's like, I have a question for you. Do you know what the horse eats? And the kid's like, I don't know. He's like, the horse eats food. And so you're gonna eat food and you're gonna be big and strong, right? For the kid, it was like, I always found it very amazing that this 80-year-old priest could communicate with a kid at that age and have a nice funny story and incorporate, instead of just saying, no, it's part of the fast and you can't drink milk, right? It's like, no, there's a way of speaking to each person in a different language almost. And so we also need to make sure that we're tailoring our students' needs when we're teaching. And we need to make sure that educating them at their level, so it's not too easy and not too difficult, right? And this is also another part of the teacher-based learning. Sometimes we think we have to dumb it down extremely for a kid, and that's a lot of times when you see the little kids, a lot of them are very rowdy because it's like, I know the story, or I already know the lesson, right? Because to them, they're not challenged. And this even happens in education, like high school or whatever. If a student, a lot of times they might be rowdy in class because they're not paying attention, because they might actually know this material or it's boring to them, or they might have done this in another time in some other after school program, right? So it's very important. I know I've even experienced it myself when I was learning a theology class. We had a Bishop Krolos from America, huge wealth of information. And I was shocked at just how much he knew, just like spitting out information, like every word. And me being so unversed at the time, I'm just like, slow it down. Like, what are you trying to say? I don't understand this right away, because it was just so much information all at once to me, right? So it's also understanding the type of people that you're teaching. Obviously, this was recorded lecture, so he didn't know that he was teaching me and he needed to dumb it down a lot. But the idea is, based on who you're teaching, let's also make sure we make it appropriate for the language and appropriate for the actual challenge that we're doing. And then when we talk about the law of the student, motivation is extremely important to learning, and it can come intrinsically or extrinsically. All right. So, and this is very important. So extrinsic can be easier to apply, but it's not long lasting. Intrinsic takes time, but it's longer lasting. So what do you guys think an example of an extrinsic motivation would be? A carrot. So what is the carrot? What is the carrot for a Sunday school kid? Chocolates. Okay. You're good. I'll give you a chocolate. What else? I would say motivation sometimes is not to be told on by your parents or to your parents. So that's the stick. That's the stick of the carrot. So if you don't behave, if you don't pay attention, I'm gonna tell your parents that you're misbehaving. Okay, now I have to, for this class, I need to make sure I behave myself. Or it could be gifts, whatever it is. What is an intrinsic way? And this is where it becomes interesting. What is an intrinsic motivation for someone? Inspiration. Okay, very good. So what kind of inspiration?
Find something that they're passionate about and learn. For example, if they like to act, you can get them to act something out of class.
Okay.
They tend to be say X and come and deliver 5 minutes.
No, absolutely. So that could be something where you're finding what they're passionate about. Absolutely. What else? What else could be intrinsic to them? When you guys decided to learn something new on your own volition, why did you decide to learn this, whatever it is, like a topic? So for me, I was curious about theology. So I wanted to learn about theology. I took a class. Why would I do that? Because I was curious. So there was a lack of knowledge somewhere, right? So my lack of knowledge made me realize I need something. So
It's
some,
also self-aware. Some people who lack, most people lack knowledge, but they're not curious because they lack the self-awareness, right?
Ah.
It's about how you find what they're interested about it. It's hard.
Mhm.
It's like
Yeah.
your point. Like most people won't know a lot or anything, but they don't seek the knowledge, right?
So, and that's a great point. So sometimes challenging them to something can bring that about, right? So if say today I want you guys to do some research before we get to class, and you're going to research the saint, and you pick Saint Cyril of Alexandria, right? And then now the kid starts reading up on it. It's like, oh, there's a lot of history and knowledge that I don't know about the church. Maybe I need to learn a little bit more about the church and what its practices are. That could be an intrinsic motivation that allows them to want to learn more. And they might come up to you and, uncle, I need to know more about the Saint Cyril or whatever it is. So for me, I remember when I fell in love with St. Anthony's Monastery, the reason why I even bothered to learn about St. Anthony was I heard he was the first monk in the world. So I was like, okay, let's find out more. And then it's like, I get to go to St. Anthony's Monastery. They give me the book, Life of St. Anthony. I read more about him. I find how amazing his life is. I see the environment he created. So then there's a passion that starts to develop. So I don't have any problems reading more about him because, there was a passion that kind of started to develop. Not everyone's going to have that passion right away. Not everyone's going to have it until they're much older, right? And that's okay. But I think it's very important that we also need to try to engage them in one way or another. And we need to be engaged in the topic itself. So sometimes, to get that motivation going, it's how can I, make that class interesting to make them curious, to make that student curious. So if I, again, talk about martyrdom, right? And I'm just saying martyrdom is about this and this and that. And these are some of the martyrs. And, I just kind of go through it quickly. It might not be as exciting as I tell you a story about St. George, who, battled for 7 years with martyrdom, and he was tortured and he did this. And it's like, wow, this guy did a lot, all for what, the name of God? Like, why? Why would he care so much about God that he'd be willing to be tortured for 7 years? Let me find out more of his thought process. And then I start finding out that there's beauty in the theology. Right? And then you can go into more and more detail. So sometimes it's not just about, again, to get that motivation intrinsically, like we said, it takes time. It absolutely takes more time, but is longer lasting because people want to find out more about that. And you see that even with non-religious or non-theological things. It's if I want to learn the piano because I want to learn the piano, right? I'm going to start practicing on it, I'm going to work harder on it, but it's because I wanted to do this and I was motivated by something intrinsically because I want to play Beethoven's Sixth Sonata or Fifth Sonata, one of those things, right? So same kind of thing.
What kind of motivation you find working together and go research?
Mhm.
Most interesting thing for this.
Absolutely.
Very rarely will I find a kid that's actually you can speak to them for some time about a subject and kind of push them to go do a little more research
Mhm.
and come back and even you or you will come back and present what we have.
Mhm.
That may apply to like 5% of kids.
100%.
What do you do there?
So obviously it's going to be TikTok. It's very difficult, obviously, when you're talking about youth, and you have to keep in mind that when Abuna Bishoy had first started, he said what our youth ministry is from ages 9 to 22. So there's a big age range, and every age range is going to be different. I can tell you now, for the younger grades, there's a lot of history in our church that can be very interesting. So when I talk about, and I always love using the story about St. George, do we know why he has the dragon on the bottom of the picture? Does anyone know?
Because killed the dragon that was haunting his town.
Yeah, like it was literally a princess story where it's like a
And then this guy in shining armor came. Like, that's kind of pretty cool, right? That's true, and that's the princess, right? But it's so it's like maybe for the younger kids, stories can actually
5 to, supposed to be.
Supposed to be, but I mean, what's practical, like, to the point, like, it's very hard to do that
Mhm.
because of the number of servants.
And they have to be also prepared.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's not just about the ratio, I get it, but step one is to have the proper ratio, then
Mhm.
step two is to make sure the servants are prepared, but if you don't have the ratio, it's not gonna happen, right?
Mhm.
So what you're saying the ideal scenario is 5, 6 to 1,
Mhm.
and you're saying that is.
I think, well, in mind, right,
Yeah. And he's raising the point about accountability, how to be sure there's accountability, which is so important, right? Like how to be sure the servant is accountable, so you're
that's
trying
the
to.
kind of, yeah, structure hierarchy that like a man or a coordinator will oversee things and
So,
direct. Yeah.
no, go ahead. I was just gonna say, with our church, for example, there's a coordinator for a certain number of grades. So grades for us, because we're a smaller church, like when I say smaller, I mean younger church. So pre-K, SK is all just one coordinator. Grades 1 through grade 5 is one coordinator, and then 6 to 8 is one coordinator, and then high school is one coordinator. Each coordinator has X number of servants within each class, and they're reporting to that servant. And if say there's an issue, so as I had mentioned with that one teacher showing the video, they went to the coordinator brought it to the teacher, so there is accountability in that respect. And that's a lot of churches work in that method, where there's usually some kind of coordinator that's responsible for a certain number of grades, and they go from there. So that, at least, just so you guys know, that's the general consensus of how they organize grades.
And usually there's like a, that's what structured objectives or.
Yep.
Like, so you actually.
So the-
start the school year,
So there's a
know,
curriculum objective and what we're planning each year, and we all have that as well. So that's all there when we're talking about like logistics. But as you guys were mentioned, accountability, that's always very important. So we have, say, a monthly servants meeting, right? That's what we're supposed to have to make sure that we're following up. Each teacher is responsible for a set number of students, right? So they're supposed to call them on their birthday or call them on a regular basis or go visit them, right? So again, back to my question was, how do we make sure that we can connect with these kids without, being too connected to the point where if you're not serving, I'm not going to teach, or I'm not going to go, or like as you said with the priests, what do you guys think is the best, or what do you think are some solutions to this?
I think teaching them
Hmm.
like the real Christianity, because it's always been about peace, and Jesus is the center of our attention.
Absolutely.
So and instead of them looking at me, we will.
Mhm.
This is the kind of thing. So that we pray together, we read the Bible together, we reflect on that end, and we will have connection. Jesus, not
Mhm.
not them having connection to that.
Absolutely. So I really like how you touched the point. It's the purpose of Christianity. It's we're both looking at Jesus. So when I'm doing my service, it's yes, I'm coming because say Abuna Pshoy came and jumped on a car, right? But in the end, it's the girl was moved by the love. Where's this love coming from? Abuna Pshoy was showing this love, but his love was coming from Christ, right? So in the end, I'm sure she was very moved by Abuna Pshoy Kemal and she loved him very much. But Abuna Pshoy Kemal was also saying, you are a child of Christ. And I'm gonna do whatever I can for the child of Christ. So it's how is that the servant has so much love for God and for me? Let's find out about this God, or let's try to not just connect it with the one servant and that's it. So definitely, I think that's very important that we have that mindset that when we're serving, we're both looking at Christ or trying to get them to also look at Christ. I know you're gonna say something. How,
I
right?
think it's important to, yeah, this is what we need to do, the how, I think it's all about bringing them to be independent, meaning do church-related activities, regardless whether create a TikTok or go serve the homeless in the street, just do it when you're not around. Because once you get into the habit of being attached to the church, not to a person,
Mhm.
it means they do the same activities they will do with you, but maybe at a lesser degree, but on their own. So it's like being independent is the key to this, I guess.
Mhm.
And again, it will be changed, it will be different from one age group to another.
Yes.
No doubt. But the only way I can think of is to teach them to do things independently.
So being independent of you is very good. I think you also made a very important point that every age group is going to be different. I think it's just so important, even if it's not completely independent of you, that it's even when you speak, like you even have to see what you're saying. That I think it's very important because that passes along. I'm always told that sometimes it's not what I do right now that makes the difference, but 10 years down the line, it's someone else spoke to them about something. And because you had laid down the first foundation, that helped them out, right? So what I'm trying to get at with this is, again, I might say, you have to love God, for example, right? And they're a child, they don't understand that right now. And they're like, I like Kiro because he's my servant. 10 years down the line, they're a little bit older, they understand a little bit more, and they're hearing a wonderful sermon by someone else. And that's what moved them along, that sermon. But it's because I might have laid down that initial groundwork, they got better, or there was that improvement overall that I am more focused on God as opposed to Kiro. And it's fine, it's okay that, they remember fondly of their servants. It's never a bad thing. We all can agree on that. We all had servants that we really enjoyed. It's never bad to like a servant, right? But like you said, we have to be very careful that when we're serving, we are pointing them also towards God. And if we are praying for them, if we are pointing them towards God, we also have to truly believe that the Holy Spirit is working within us to move them towards that purpose as well. And I always like to use the examples of the saints. Saint Anthony was someone who moved a lot of people, and a lot of people looked up to him. But it wasn't as soon as he died that everyone's like, okay, khalas, we'll go back to our old life. He was moving people, making them want to change their lives to become different, right? And I think that's something with our service that we want to try to emulate. You'll find me that I always like to use the examples of the saints because they're the ones who perfected a lot of things, unlike me. So the idea is, let's look at what they did. How did they do it? A lot of times actions, a lot of times it's just prayers, just purely praying for your kid will make a difference because the Holy Spirit will work inside them, just like how it works inside of you, right?
Back to the point,
actions,
they're
yes.
working still, it's an exponential push to have similar interests.
Absolutely,
Sure. So it's good
absolutely.
to be able to do that, depending on being able to, I can do everything, but you and I have nothing in common. Like the one who didn't look at me when I talk, we have nothing in common. It makes it that much harder versus like, hey, like outside of like Sunday school, you can go out and talk about soccer. For example. That kind of gets a little bit of a hook where that kid is in. At least you know how to start with small talk before you can begin to build that love. And
Absolutely.
I used to agree with a great point of well, it's all about Jesus in the middle. You could talk about Jesus when you have something a little bit of a commonality. The next person has not dependent. So,
Absolutely. So
all that is great.
absolutely. Excellent. See, this is what this is all about. I'm actually very happy with this group so far because there's been a lot more discussions. No, there's been a lot more discussions than the first time around. I shouldn't say that out loud because it's being recorded, so they might hear this afterwards. So again, going back to the laws of the student, the needs of the student can be broken down into two parts: task-related needs and maintenance-related needs, right? So the need is what participants must learn to do minus what participants can already do. So I need to learn something that I don't already know, right? If I already know it, what's the point of me learning it, right? So that's one of the needs. That's we'll say the task-related need, right? And then there's the needs where participant state of mind plus participant safety. Now, when you say participant safety, you're thinking like, what do you mean? But we're also talking about spiritual safety. We're talking about safety as a overarching theme, right? So when we talk about maintenance-related needs, are their internal issues interacting with external, right? So if say I speak about a topic that really hits very close to home for someone, and they just were going through a traumatic experience with a specific issue, and then you bring it up in Sunday school, that can be very problematic, right? So something I would warn anyone from ever doing is, if say one of the students confides in you about they like someone, you don't go the next week talking about relationships with the opposite sex. That might not be very good because then they're like, is he talking about me or whatever it is, right? So that's kind of what I'm trying to say when I say the participant state of mind plus their safety. So when we talk about the preferences of the students, we also got to see the different types of things. So the spirituality, are they keen to grow or are they apathetic? Apathetic meaning they don't care, right? So if they are keen to grow, that's obviously going to make it a very good environment for you to teach them something new. Whereas if they're apathetic, it's going to be very difficult for you to try to teach them something new, and you have to try to find that, what can I do to engage you, just to at least make you somewhat interested, right? Then we talk about motivation. So do they respond to challenge or encouragement? That's another thing that we have to also keep in mind when we're talking about their needs. If you're all about being challenged, that's great. You know, that might help you out, that you get more challenged, or a Sunday school teacher asks you, I want you to do this for me. Whereas someone says, I'm very proud of you for listening. And I always thought, because I'm the type that likes to be challenged, I could never understand the encouragement part in service. Like, if you didn't do anything, don't encourage, right? Or it's not going to help. But what I noticed more recently, again, in my service, it's a lot of kids do respond to encouragement. And I found it amazing how different they will be the next week after you've encouraged them. Good job, Habibi, you did so well with this, or I'm very proud of you because of ABC. And you see them next week, it's like, oh, I got some positive reinforcement, so I'm going to try this again the week after. Or I remember one time there was one kid who was very hyper, and I went to their mom. I was like, you know, your son's so wonderful in class, and you know, I'm really happy with how how active he is, and I'm hoping, you know, we can keep seeing him in class. And like, it was very positive words. I remember the parents were looking at me like, you're not talking about my son. Like, this is not the same person, right? I was like, no, he was wonderful, blah, blah. And the next week, again, it's like, I see him like so excited to come, and he wants to try to pay attention a little bit. Again, was he perfect? No, but there was improvement. So it's like this encouragement piece actually works for some people, right? And so it's understanding that. Yes.
Sorry, it's funny enough because I was talking about that at work. Even for elders, positive feedback, like the feedback systems we use right now is more aimed for the what we call constructive feedback than
Mhm.
so we don't offer, we don't give enough positive feedback, and we only give constructive
Mhm.
feedback, which is somehow broken because like they are always unresponsive.
Yeah.
However, if we're giving positive feedback all the time, and the constructive feedback would be the like the one-off scenarios, they would be more open to receive it, more open, more connected.
Mhm. So, question for you: why do you think we're more used to challenges, or we'll say constructive feedback, than positive feedback? Any ideas? Culture. What we were talking about earlier. That's culture.
Funny enough, I'm the only Middle Eastern person.
That's.
Like, so it's not, I don't think it's only good. It's
Mhm.
Human nature to be negative.
human nature just to spot the bad
Issues.
but not to like
Work with it.
like on things.
No, absolutely.
It's actually, they've done studies on this to show that it's actually parts evolutionary advantage is slightly more negative because you're more likely to be risk averse.
Interesting.
Eaten by a saber. But it's still, it's one of those, like, it's healthy to have a little bit of a cynical side, but you need to be more aware and be on your, as you said, when you're teaching,
Mhm.
trying to be constructive, or not constructive, be positive.
Yes.
Because they've also done studies to show that if you encourage somebody, they're more likely to solve a puzzle
Mhm.
3 times faster or something like that. And you tell them that they're
Interesting.
like,
Alright.
like same IQ, same person, same setting. It's like you'll do it faster. If somebody does a good job, keep it up, so you're gonna try harder.
Interesting.
Positive, even though human nature is negative, or more prone to negative, it's actually important. You're very positive.
Be positive. Absolutely.
But then you say you need false, not one or the other.
It's in a teaching setting, it's much more advantageous to be positive. Like, figure out a way of saying, okay, like, they say it's a sandwich where you get a compliment, then you get feedback, and then you get a compliment again.
Yeah,
So
so-
you've done this great, try doing this, and then good job with this.
Sure.
Yeah.
So it's not one or the other.
Yes, it's a mix.
Yeah,
And
it's kind of an overdose of positive or
Yeah,
negative.
And that's why we also have to look at each individual and see what their needs are, right? Even when we're talking about expectations, right? We're looking for either nourishment. So am I nourishing this person by teaching them something new, or am I nurturing them where it's I just want to show them love or show them that I care about them? Because that's also part of their needs. The child, they might need more love or more care than an actual lesson, right? Versus another person, they might actually be more interested in learning something new, right? So again, that's part of that needs of what the person wants. Orientation, do they prefer the discussion that makes them think or share their feelings? That's another way. It's how do you want that discussion to go when you're talking to them? Is it, I'm trying to, again, be very direct with them, or make it more open-ended so that they can kind of express themselves? Again, everyone's a little different. And then obviously when you're looking at organization and stability and structure and operation, all these things are, you have to think about when you're talking about the needs of the student, right? Our biggest thing that I always want to say is we need to also be very stable with these kids, with the youth, whatever it is. And when I say stability is, you don't know what they're going through. We all won't ever know what everyone is going through at any given point in time. But what we do need to recognize is that we have to be there for them, right? It's God has always been committed to us, right? He's always said, "Do not fear, I am here." Have we been able to say the same thing to our youth? And I think that's very important, because a lot of times that can feel like a betrayal, where it's, I said I'm your Sunday school teacher, but only on Sundays. Forget about the rest of the week, or I'm not going to call you, or you'll find me only here, but I can't make it on these other days, or I'm going to try this, but not that, right? That weakens that stability, and that can affect their needs or even wanting to engage with you. So that's part of that, building that relationship piece and making sure that we can be stable for them, because there's also days where they might have bad days, right? It's funny, my wife is very big on reading these books for kids and babies, because it's, understanding why they're doing what they're doing. And one of the things is being consistent with your child, right? So it's showing them love, this no matter what. If they're throwing a temper tantrum, you give them a hug. I love you, Habibi. I know you're upset, but we can't do this A, B, C, D, E. But you still show them the love first and foremost. It's the same thing with the youth, right? It's when we're there, we have to still be consistent in our show of love, even if they are in the wrong, even if, and we see this in Jesus, his nature, right? Despite people humiliating Jesus, despite him being crucified, despite people like insulting him, he still shows love for everyone, right? So it's the same thing for us with our kids, because, and I'll tell you now, it's happened with Lini where, I've had kids that hear something or they get upset about something and then they act out, right? And they're waiting for you to, we'll almost say, punish them. And then they can say, aha, see, this servant was bad all along because he did this or because he said that, right? But when you show them love consistently, it almost breaks down their whole world view, because they were expecting you to do this because this is the consequence of that and yada yada. But when you show them love, that's such a powerful message. That's such a powerful way to show God's love, because it's like, this is what God has for you. Because my love is very limited as a human. If I can show you this love, how much more can God show you? How much more love, how much more consistency can God show you? And I think that's very important with our law of the student. And when we're talking about their needs, one of the basic needs that they have is love. And we need to be able to show that. So we've talked about, again, law of the spirit, law of the teacher, law of the student, and now we're going to go into the law of the subject. So when we're talking about the law of the subject, 3 questions need to be answered. Is the content real to me? Is it relevant to the people? And have I sufficiently researched the content? This is always very interesting, because I think sometimes when you get a lesson plan or a topic, right, you might not find it very enjoyable for you to read it, right? And it's like, how am I supposed to give a lesson if I don't find it very real, or if I don't do the proper research? And have you guys dealt with this? And if so, what have you done? Any situations like that? So Abuna Shoy had told me a funny story one time. He said, if you follow a pastor, like there's a saying that says, if you follow a pastor or a priest, for a few weeks and you hear their sermons, you'll know what's going on in their lives, right? And the reason why is a lot of times when people are giving a talk, they like to apply personal stories, they like to apply their own things, or if they're struggling with something at that varying moment, you might find them gearing whatever it is towards that. And I find it very interesting because I've seen it even with priests when they're trying to bring a topic. They might have read a story of 5 loaves and 2 fish, and they bring up a whole different theme, and you're like, how did this get connected? And you see afterwards as they're talking how they connected this with this, but it's like, I would have never thought of that. I would have never connected that with that. And I think sometimes we need to be able to do that in our service or when we're talking about the law of the subject. If they give you a topic or whatever it is, let's try to make it real for me. So how can I apply it? How can I make it relevant to myself first so that I can be passionate about it? Because remember when we said, if you don't have the passion, it becomes very difficult to give a talk. And then the other part to this is, have I sufficiently researched the content? This is very important because a lot of times when you sufficiently research the content, it makes it a lot easier to talk about it. If you're not researching the topic sufficiently and you get a question asked, and then you get stuck on it or you don't know how to respond to it, you start to lose that passion right away, or you're shaken a little bit, we'll say. And this shows from the student, because when they see that you're shaken, they say, well, if they're not sure about what they're talking about, what else are they not sure about? And it can go down that path. We also see that when we're talking about a subject that is very personal to us, our body language, everything changes. I have this one sermon from Father Abuna Anthony Murad. I'm not sure if many of you know him. He's a priest in Ottawa. Really good speaker. He's very passionate about a lot of the topics that he has. And again, I'll just take little snippets of how you hear him talk. Just the way he's talking, you can tell he truly believes what he is saying. It's not just a sermon to him, it's a way of life. And to me, it always amazes me, because with Abuna Anthony Murad, if any of you go, you always feel very moved with a lot of his sermons, because you're like, wow, like this really hit home. And again, I could have said the exact same words and it would have been a very different response, right? But for him, it's very real because it's, he really meant what he was saying. So I'm going to try to bring a little snippet of it. Hopefully you guys can hear it.
Listening to sermons as we go about our day. Listening to sermons as we go about our days, driving around or doing our work.
He's not helping me. Technology today is not great for me.
This is the mission of Upper Room Media. To make the word of God.
I just want to get a little snippet of what he was talking. I should have. So I'll send the link on Moodle so you guys can hear it on your own. But the idea is he's talking about communion. He's talking about the body and blood of Christ. And even some of the things he says, they're extremely moving, because you even hear him say, it's like, we need to stop, I need to stop, right? And just the power that's in his voice, you can tell he was thinking about this for a while. He was thinking about, how am I going to bring this topic to the people? How am I going to be able to really send that message home? And it's very beautiful, because if you are there sitting in and listening to this, you really start to think about it. It's like, how have I been thinking of the body and blood of Christ? How have I been thinking about this? Do I need to make a change in how I view this? Right? This is very important. When we say developing real content needs us to have a commitment to it, we must be inspired, because when we are, it comes through as a passionate word, not drawn out ones. So there's a little piece and an excerpt that I have from St. Isaac the Syrian when he talks about one verse. And then what I find amazing is a lot of our church fathers, they do just that. They're reading one verse and all of a sudden they have a whole speech out of one verse. And you're like, how? A big part of it is they have a passion for God and they're contemplating, they're thinking about every single syllable, every single word that's being said. So over here, he says, yes. Oh, oh, you have it? Okay. Which one you have?
He's the same. He doesn't
Yeah.
change anyway, so maybe the passion.
How do I fight passions? How do I fight them? Okay. So I have something from Abuna
It's
Anthony.
not about community itself. It's about
Yeah.
belief.
So let's see if we can get that.
Welcome to Answers from an Apostolic Faith.
No. that's what it says.
the Great. Saint Basil, he begins to explain what the passions are by first demonstrating what virtue is. He says that virtue is when we take the faculties and the gifts that God has given us and created inside us when he created us in his image, and we use those same faculties and those gifts to be able to turn towards God, to know him and to grow in his likeness. On the contrary of this, what the passions are, is when we willfully take those same faculties and instead of turning towards God, we turn towards something that is temporal and something that is created. Instead of using those gifts and those faculties to turn towards the Creator, what we end up doing is that we use those faculties to turn towards our own pleasures, and by in the process, what happens is that passions begin to develop inside the human person.
So I just, again, this might have not been the best one of Abuna Anthony when it comes to like seeing his like voice and inflection, but if you notice, again, his voice wasn't monotone. It wasn't just, you know, one style, but it's up and down, it slows down, it speeds up, because again, he's very passionate about what he's saying. So it's not just, you know, I'm just saying this for the sake of saying it. So one of the things, as I was saying, St. Isaac the Syrian, when he's contemplating on one thing or one verse, he says this. So spiritual delight is not enjoyment found in things that exist substantially outside the soul of those who receive it, and are promised to us for the restitution to come. If it were, then the words, the kingdom of heaven is within you, and thy kingdom come, would mean that we have acquired matter that is palpable, that of a palpable nature within us, as the earnest of the delight found in the kingdom. So again, he's contemplating on these one or two verses, one or two sentences, and he comes up with this whole thought process. What does the kingdom of heaven mean when they say the kingdom of heaven is within us, right? And this specific homily number 2, it's not just a few paragraphs, it's a few pages, right? The idea is, again, they use these small little verses, but they're contemplating on because they do sufficient research. They're doing their research, they're contemplating, they're reading other church fathers, and that's how they come to where they're coming to. So it's very important that we have to have that sufficient research. It's very important that we have to make the content relevant to the people in front of us. Because again, if I talk about a topic that means nothing to someone, there, as much as I might have a good talk, it might not be beneficial to them and they might not pay attention, or it's something they've heard a million times, and it has to be real to us. So that's the law of the subject. Then we get to the law of the style. So when we talk about the law of the style, we understand now that when teaching, it must be learner-centered or student-centered, as we talked about. So we must learn to appeal to the learner by making the content more meaningful and memorable to them. So first is learning intelligence, learning modes, and learning style. So those are the 3 things that we're going to kind of talk about with the law of the style. But just the important thing is that since the focus is on the student, right, we need to make sure the material is speaking their language. As we've said this whole time, we want to make it student-centered. So people can understand in different ways, and we tailor it accordingly, and that's where we get the learning intelligence, the learning modes, the learning styles. So learning intelligence is the ability of the brain to process and interact with certain types of information. Learning modes is the manner in which information is most effectively received. And learning styles is the manner in which information is most effectively ordered and processed. So again, we're going to learn about each one, and hopefully we can go back to our case study and kind of go back to these students and see what kind of learning styles they might have been, or when we talk about the law of the style, what kind of styles would they have benefit from the most. So the first one is learning intelligence. So as you can see, there's multiple different types of intelligence because people can learn in different ways. So there's the visual, spatial, there's the musical, bodily, kinesthetic, interpersonal, verbal, linguistic, logical, mathematical, naturalistic, and interpersonal or intrapersonal. Okay, all these types of intelligences have a place in time when you're teaching. You can use a variety of them. It's not that you're stuck with one of them. I'll give you an example. For me personally, I'm not sure if you guys have any examples in your service in the past or present, or even right now when you talk to someone, what's the best ways you approach them. But I know when I had a grade 1 class, the first time I had a grade 1 class, I hadn't had a grade 1 class since I first started service. And then by the time I got back to grade 1, all the classes I've been teaching were university. So it's all PowerPoint, all, kind of more visual like that. Whereas grade 1s, they were just all hyper and running around. So when I tried doing PowerPoint or videos, didn't always work. But what I found helped me out a lot was when I would do acting. So I'd say, okay, today we're going to learn about Moses and the 10 Commandments. So who wants to be Moses? I take one kid, you're going to be Moses. And I take another kid, okay, you're going to be Pharaoh. And we're going to act out a scene together. And the other people, you guys can be Pharaoh's people. Other people could be the Jewish people. And I get them to act out and be very physical or bodily kinesthetic or body smart, right? Because that's how the kids in grade 1 were learning the best, right? And then they would have some fun. I'm acting out, I'm playing, I'm dancing, whatever it is, and they're moving. So they're now focused on the movements as opposed to talking to each other or running around in circles in class, right? So it helped me understand that not everyone's going to respond to the same kind of learning stimulus. Have you guys had to deal with this at any point in time in your service or just with your kids or anything like that? So what have you found is very, can you give me a specific example of a time when that did work, or what it is that you need to change in your teaching to explain something to someone?
Are you asking how we've used the
Yeah.
intelligences?
How have you used it in the past, or what have you done in the past to use it?
Well, even I think it's from a intrapersonal support to know how people are, right?
Mhm.
So sitting here as a student, I know kinetics, so
You want to play soccer, don't you?
so I know that's one way for me to work. So when I try to learn, for example, I always try to learn in a kinetic way. So that's how I do it for myself, but that also applies on self-awareness part, because I know that I need to do it that way. So kind of running with that same string, I would actually try to foster something interpersonal and intrapersonal. So I would want to work with you
Mhm.
to encourage you to be more self-aware. So you and the student, it's harder if you're 8 years old.
Yeah.
But you can work with it and say, hey, who likes to dance versus who likes to run around?
Mhm.
They can all learn from it and apply it that way. That's how I would do it. It's different because when you're adults, it's
Yeah.
learn it. It's hard to
Learn like
not
this.
be kinetic. Not run around.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's, I think one of the more important ones is the self-smart.
Hmm.
Also that it's not as encouraged.
Absolutely. You bring a very good point about us being trained on, being sitting well, like listening, and that's how the best way to learn. I remember when I was serving, I had this thing where one kid had asked me about a book about Pope Carlos, so I got them a book, and I thought this was a great idea. Moving forward, best behaved kid can get a book about Pope Carlos, and I thought that was, the carrot, the extrinsic motivator, and I was hoping that would work out. And I remember we had this one kid who always hyper, and it used to frustrate me because he tried for like 5 seconds, and then he starts being hyper again and talking and this and that, and then at the end he's like, "Was I the best? Was I the best?" I was like, "No, there's a lot of other people who were much better than you," right? And I didn't think I was doing anything wrong because there were genuinely some people, specifically a lot of girls, who were very well behaved and so excited about the gift and really wanted it, right? And it didn't click with me until I was hearing it from the mom who was saying like, I love what you're doing with the kids and everything, but I want you to know something that happened. She told me how my kid, he's like, I never win the prizes. It doesn't matter how hard I try. And that concept of doesn't matter how hard I tried. So maybe those 5 seconds was truly as hard as he could try to be a better person for that class. And he was hoping to get some kind of reward as a positive feedback. And I wasn't giving that positive feedback. So instead, I was doing the negative feedback where it's like, oh, he's misbehaving, therefore he's always going to be misbehaving. And so he's like, well, it's not going to make a difference now since I'm already not going to get the prize. I might as well misbehave the whole class. And so it really clicked with me that every person, especially even when we look at boys and girls, they also learn very differently. Like you said, boys generally are a lot more kinetic. They're a lot more moving. Girls might not necessarily be a lot more moving. That doesn't mean that they're not learning as much as these are, right? Just I have to tailor my approach. I have to tailor my learning style. So just to go over these different ones quickly, linguistic is listening, reading, writing. So they learn best when activities have stories, discussion, word puzzles. Logical is the logical thinking and reason, and they learn best when the activities have tricky questions, analysis or interpreting, and teaching that incorporates deductive approach, predictions based on what is known. Musical is sensitive to music and learn best when singing songs. And just so you know, the musical one, I find that very interesting because I found out that Arius at the time, when he was trying to really bring about the, Jesus is not God, he would actually make a song up for a lot of people. I'm not sure, you sound like you might know it, but basically he would go and he would tell them, basically sing it aloud. There was a time when the sun was not. So there was a time when Jesus did not exist, essentially. So there's God the Father, Jesus didn't exist. So you'd find these farmers that just sing along. There was a time when the sun was not. And they keep singing, and now it's being ingrained into them that there was a time when God the Son was not existent. But it's how did he do it? Through music. So he just kind of singing it in there, right? So again, musical, it's sensitive to music and learning best when singing songs. The visual spatial, they think and remember with pictures. So they learn best with arts and crafts or activities and charts. Bodily kinesthetic, again, movement is part of the learning process. So role playing, putting them in little scenes, that helps. As you mentioned, intrapersonal, right? So interpersonal is good understanding of self, and they learn best through quiet time or inner reflections. Interpersonal is good with working with others and relating to them. So they learn best with cooperative activities or cooperative working. Naturalistic is good understanding of nature and the environment around them. So they learn best through outdoor activities, using items of nature for reflection. So there's a lot of appreciation of God. And again, that's one I think we don't touch on enough. But I always found that very interesting when I was learning about it, because maybe someone sees a tree and they see something completely different than what I see, right? And they're reflecting on what they've been learning. And maybe that might take a little bit more of an intellectual capacity to get there. Before we keep going, it's 5 o'clock. Let me give you guys 10 minutes and then we'll reconvene. Okay, thank you. And then from there, we'll be good to go. All right, so we talked about the learning intelligences. When we talk about the law of style, again, we cannot say one person is smarter versus another, because we've just seen that there's different types of learning styles. And like different love languages, learning intelligence factors into it, right? So we learn through the senses, and this affects what we retain. So what I always found very interesting, there's the IQ test, which is based specifically on linguistic and logical intelligences. So someone might be very poor in their IQ test, but they might have other areas where they're extremely intelligent in. So we might have these preconceived notions if we just, paint everyone with the same brush. And that's something that can be very dangerous in our service. As I mentioned earlier with one of my services, when I had the 2 students that just stared at me and, I genuinely thought either they weren't paying attention, they couldn't hear me, something was wrong with them. Again, it wasn't necessarily that, because later on, you know, after they were outside of my class, they're a lot more engaged, they're a lot more talkative, there's a lot more going on there. When we talk about, we need to understand that some people may learn of God in other ways. God is not for the wise, for example. A good example is Buna Justus Antoni. I'm not sure if any of you know of him, but he was a very simple monk, like super simple. There's the saying, there's fools for Christ, that's the term, where there's certain monks, because they're so holy, almost to the point they don't want to get recognized that they're holy, they act insane, right? And so Father Justus was one of them, and there's actually a lot of stories of his blessings and how he's taught these people simplicity or humility, but it's all through actions. And they might think that he's very stupid, like a lot of monks thought he was very, you know, not intelligent, but really he understood what was going on, he just didn't want to act it out. And you'll see there's a lot of stories, like one I remember very vividly. Apparently at the time, keep in mind this is very early on, smoking wasn't seen as something bad, and so there were some monks that would still smoke. And so they were in the monastery, and he was working making the urban. And this one monk, he's just like, yeah, Justus, come give me like a light for my cigarettes. And Father Justus, what does he do? He puts his hand right into the oven, grabs a burning piece of like charcoal. He's like, here you go, right? So the guy freaks out. He's like, never mind, I don't want it. And he's like, okay, puts it back in, right? He, to the person, it might have been like something very like, what is this? But it also made him think twice about smoking a cigarette. So it's like, maybe Abuna Justus understood that if he did this, he would freak the person out. The person might not. So it's like, there might have been a lot of intelligence in this. And obviously he didn't get burnt because, you know, he was able to do that. So it's like, there's a lot of spirituality in his actions, but from the outside, it might have been like this very unintelligent monk just put his hand in fire, right? When it comes to receiving information, and again, talking about how one person versus another, we receive information through our senses as the following. We see through seeing, 75% of information is received. Then through hearing is 13%. So right now, just me talking, only 13% of the information is actually being received. Hopefully the seeing as well, you see something that helps retain that information better. Then there's touching, which is 6%, tasting and smelling, which is 3% each. Obviously, tasting and smelling are very small percentages as well as touching, but we see that the majority is through visual, that we see it. That's how we get a lot of our lessons. And then when it comes to learning, 10% of what we read is learned, 15% of what we hear is learned, and 80%, actually doesn't make sense. Sorry. And they say about 80% of what we experience is what we actually retain the most. So again, knowing that, we know that experiences are the best way to really keep that information in. And so sometimes when it comes to our teaching, it's how can we make this more of an experience for the students, right? Because that's what's going to really retain it for them the most.
You raised a good point there. Like, how do you stop the kid from, hey, I want to, smoking is bad, kids.
Yeah.
Smoking is bad, but you won't know until you try it. No, like I can be on purpose. But
Yeah.
I have a lot of things that tell kids not to do. It's kind of that doesn't work because they still learn from experience.
Mhm.
How would you do that in a setting like this?
So
Where it's like a lot of it is just like don't do that.
yeah. So
I said the experience in this case, like through the smoking example, the things that you have visually.
Yeah.
Enough knowledge to actually show them. Here
this is the result.
This is what you experience. And,
So like here's a long.
yeah, don't smoke. Smoke is bad. That's
Yeah.
how, you know, a good looking lung versus
So that's good, but then again, what about the God aspect, the spiritual aspect? Because we know smoking is bad, and there's that visual proof. You can experience God. I will say that you can experience God for sure. It's very hard. Yeah. So that's a great question. What do you guys think we could do in someone saying like, why should I believe in God, or why should I, you know, spend, you know, all of my Sunday going to church and then Sunday school and then this and that and that? Like, why? Why should I be doing this?
well, I know you're asking, am I gonna ask you, like, what would you tell them in class? Because I know the answer for me that would work for me, but I'm not sure what the answer would be for a class of like 10-year-olds.
So as I always say, it's going to be tailored to the class, but I think the message that you have to have is love. Like that, it has to come back to love. Whatever you're saying, it has to be related to the love of God. So it's for for me, what really got to me was the fact that I realized I am not a perfect person, and I'm talking about my own personal experience. I realize I'm not a perfect person, and yet for some reason, God still loves me, right? Despite all my flaws, despite all my shortcomings, every single time I sin, God is happily getting on the cross for me. So that's what really moved me more than anything. It was the love that I understood it in that way. And that's kind of the message that was told to me that really got to me more than anything else, to come back to God, we'll say, or to really appreciate God, or to want to learn about God more. Again, every grade, the message you're going to say is going to be completely different. Every child might be a completely different message, but the theme of it has to go back to love. It has to, because that's what realistically what we're all as humans are missing. We are missing that love, and then we try to supply the love with something else. So maybe if I don't get enough love from God, I'm going to try to fill that void with games. It'll make me happy for a time, but the key is for a time, and then I go back to searching for something else. Drugs, alcoholism, all that, it's because I am missing something and I'm searching for something else. So we need to make sure that when we're giving the message, and again, the message is going to be different based on who you are as a person, how you talk, and also the people you're talking to, but it has to come back to love.
Because it's very easy for them to believe that God loves them. Like, you know that Jesus loves you, right? And they will just all the rest. They believe it very much. So it's easy to get. Now it's our part to love and that might be happy.
Absolutely.
To this point, I guess, yes, you're right. Jesus loves you and they will not hate that. But that's assuming the parents are saying similar message at home. So I think the challenge today is what parents are saying and doing, or what teachers are saying and doing. The rest of it is not necessarily supporting the idea of Jesus loves you. So I think that's the biggest challenge today. Because if you say to a kid that Jesus loves you, no, he doesn't. I asked for a smartwatch and I didn't get it. Then what? Right? So I think this is I don't know, like I don't know how to answer this question I'm asking you, because it's gonna have to happen. Like, how do you say that? Yeah, it's a message of love. So there will be materialistic things that kids think that's what love really is. Then it's like, oh, I love you, so I'm gonna buy you. I take you to McDonald's or whatever. They, you said different ages would have different expectations what the expression of love is from the people around you. So when you say it's gonna always be about Jesus loves you, that can be easily challenged.
So what I would say is that real love that they're understanding it is, right? And so then maybe you have to also make sure that you can explain what love is to them, because I'll tell you now, the McDonald's aspect, I love my fast food. I know that I feel great when I'm eating it. I feel terrible afterwards, right? Same thing with drugs, same things with alcohol, same things with anything that is not rooted in Christ. It will make you feel good for a while. Smartwatch is going to make me feel good because I have a cool gadget and whatnot. But then there's a new smartwatch that comes out, and then this is a garbage watch. Why would I even carry it? Right? But you know what I mean? So it is also very important to teach them what love is. And you're right that the parents have to be involved in that, in showing them love, but sometimes they might not experience that at home. And so it's you being, and again, remember how I was talking about that consistency? That can really break down someone and help them understand love. Because for us, and I always like to say this, we as humans are very harsh on ourselves. And when I say that is, you wrong me, I need to get my pound of flesh. I need to make sure that it's fair. And love is very interesting because it almost doesn't care sometimes about fairness. It's about love, right? So Jesus, he has every right not to die for us, right? Quite frankly, we deserved it. And if God was just thinking from a human perspective, right, we'd all be doomed. But in this case, because of that love, there was just so much love for us that he was willing to die. That's true love, right? It's no greater love than this, for you to lay down your life for your brother, right? So we really need to try to make sure we can explain that to them, and it could be through showing them what love is. So maybe they are hurting and they act out, and you still show them love without, giving them McDonald's or this or that, but showing them that you care about them, calling them, all these different things. That's showing them true love. And I would hope that, God willing, their parents do the same to show them what true love is. But again, you never know. You never know. But that's why I'm saying the message that we send for the kids always has to come back to love. Whatever it is, it has to come back to love. Whatever the message is, however the message is said, it needs to come back to love, because realistically, our faith is based on this. Our entire faith can be brought back to why. Like, why did God do all of what he did? Because of love for us. It always comes back to that. Like, if I forgot a philosophical method where if you keep going asking why, it always goes back to God, right? So it's the same thing with our faith. It's like, why do I stand up and pray in a liturgy for 3 hours when I could be sleeping in at home? The hope is because I want to do something that is pleasing to God, because I want to show him my love for him, right? It goes back to love. Everything needs to go back to love, and we need to be able to explain that to the youth. And again, every youth is different. One youth might see love as this, right? So maybe I need to change their perspective of what love is. Maybe someone does have a good view of love. So it's like, let's explain to them what God did to really show them that love, right? It's always going to be different, that message, but you need to make sure it goes back to love. That's my only thing I can say consistently and effectively about that. It needs to go back to love. Make sense?
I think this program is good in terms of like presenting, let's say, some sort of consistency on the way Sunday school teachers teach. But I would imagine a very small percentage of current Sunday school teachers taking a program similar to this. So I don't think consistency exists there.
It doesn't, but I'll tell you this, a lot of what our church does, they are working their very best, and that's where coordinators come into play. That's where people that are also higher in their roles try to help cause that change. You don't always, and I'm going to say this very bluntly, you don't always need to take a course to learn something, right? So I remember even my brother-in-law, when I was learning about theology, he's very well versed in theology. And I remember there were a lot of things I didn't understand. I come and like, what do you mean? He's like, oh yes, this thing. And I'm like, where did you learn all this? He's like, oh, I just read some books. I read some stuff. I'm like, this is very hard concepts. I'm having difficulty understanding it. So a lot of times our servants, they're being mentored by their coordinators. And the coordinators are being mentored by Abuna and so on to create consistency.
You're talking about now, we're talking about, kids from grade, let's say 4 or 5 to grade 12, they need to be receiving consistent message, right? Through different Sunday school teachers. We know Sunday school teachers change every year.
Yeah.
At least in most cases.
Yeah.
You talk about consistency that, kids go to church in Paris and all of a sudden it's family to Saga. And now the level of consistency, like I'm not sure if the church, and again, like look at the church as an organization, not necessarily like,
Yeah.
house of God. Just think about it from an organization perspective. How, like, is there anything within the church that actually keep the consistency other than, you can say, we always look at the Bible as our point of reference, but the way we deliver the message.
So I would say that nothing's going to be 100% perfect. Nothing, but there are things in place that the church does to try to improve. And if you notice, and I always say this, the question I have for everyone when we first start this is, why did you join this? A lot of times, I think 9 out of 10, it's Abuna Shoy told me that I should join it, right? So why would Abuna Shoy do that? Because he's trying to create that consistency, right? Same thing with even Pope Kyrillos. I love the message when you read the Silent Patriarch. his message was very consistent. The people he picked were very specific people because he wanted to make a consistent message. And there's even this beautiful story about this church in Greece, right? So it's an Orthodox church. It's a very interesting story. It's basically what happens is the bishop of that area had a lot of issues with the clergy and yada yada yada, and it came to a point where the bishop, and forgive me for saying this, but he was basically caught in the act of fornication with one of the priest's wives. Terrible thing. The church in that diocese was a mess because it's like my bishop was wrong and he was stripped of his priest or his rank, and the priests all around them were just nowhere to be found. And what the archbishop in Greece did basically was he took a few monks from wherever the monastery they were from. It was like 3 or 4 months. And it's like, I'm going to place them into this area. And it's like, once they placed these people, like within a span of 10 years, the entire diocese started growing and flourishing and becoming much better. And what's to say to that is, it doesn't need, like, consistency doesn't have to come from 6 or 7 people or from 12 or from 20. It can come from 4 people, but if they're consistent in their message. So when we're talking about coordinators, if there's the coordinators and they're consistent in their message, the rest of the people below them will happen. If the priests are consistent in their message, it'll flow. So,
What Nina's kind of flagging
oh,
something, it's more of like a saying this is so valuable, and I think that refresher course
needs to be done.
needs to be added. Like, so
Ah,
instead of having
sorry,
this-
I misunderstood.
instead of having this, like you're teaching, but you're trying to take it because you want the foundation. And to the point that you made about accountability, maybe 3 years from now, even for you, instead of, I don't know how long this
Mhm.
is, 3 months, that we have a 1 week
Refresher.
refresher, where it's just like a crash course to drive that accountability, right?
Mhm.
So I think that's what he's saying. Is to have that-
Okay, I
the-
see.
the
Sorry, I
coordinators are great,
misunderstood.
Yeah, the coordinators are great, but like the content's so valuable that
Yeah.
even refreshing it every 3-4 years
That's fair.
would be great because it drives that accountability that
Mhm.
you flagged earlier, right? I think that's what he's saying.
Okay.
Yeah, I get that's.
No.
It's like something along the lines of like coordinators across the country.
Mhm.
across-
All together.
Yeah.
Come together.
Need some sort of
It's like a crash course.
synchronization.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. This
A
summer,
seminar.
yeah.
So you know that they do have at least once a year seminars for all servants.
Yeah.
Are you aware of that?
There
There is, yeah.
I think he's saying this.
But this
content
is,
so
yeah,
valuable
so
that
it
you
would be good
part
to
of that
have.
because
Yeah.
you're here because you want to learn this foundational stuff.
No, that's a very good
Having
point.
it here, that is ingrained, like, okay, even if half a servant's left, if you're a servant and you've taken this already every 2 years, like CPR. you
Yeah.
need to refresh your CPR.
No, that's a very good point.
And it's North American problem because in Egypt, they have a standard curriculum across the whole.
Really?
Yeah, like Sunday school curriculum. Yeah. I know.
Like it is across the nation? Like if I go from one church to another church, same thing each week? That's very interesting.
Gerges Habib.
Yeah.
Gerges Habib.
So he set up like a curriculum throughout the entire thing and it just passed through. Wow.
But lately, actually, not that, however, like even discharge, it's a standard curriculum.
That's amazing.
From like grade 1 to 6 now, and I think they are extending them for
Wow.
like 7 to 9.
That's amazing. I didn't know that.
I think it needs to be more than, there are like, I give a simple example. Like, you learn about, St. George when you're in grade 1, and that's how you learn it. This is a story, this is a picture, it's one thing. But it's more than that. More than that, it's something similar. Tells you exactly what you need to say.
Interesting.
This is what we need to teach the kids.
That's very cool.
It's not just, teaching them St. George.
But there is, I think that part of practice is the,
For servants training, essentially.
yeah, for servant training, and even like the high level message, like, learning hymns versus singing like, new church songs. That's basically like typical, like, new, let's call it the modern music
Yeah.
versus church hymns. You can easily talk to at least in our local church today and say, oh, the songs, it doesn't count. You need to learn the church
Mhm.
hymns. When you look at some Mark 2,000 years ago, as you said, he said, okay, you guys like these songs from the the
Yeah.
Egyptian heritage, if you will, right?
Mhm.
I'm gonna make some,
Mix of them.
like, I'm gonna have you use this little, like this music, but with some
Mhm.
church teaching. So it seems like the high level messages, sometimes I feel they're inconsistent. Like I can tell you, I experienced this with my kids. In grade 11, my kids are in grade 11, they might actually know this. And this message, this level of consistency,
Mhm.
I can assure you it doesn't exist. To like
Mhm.
at the
At the high level.
overarching message, I listen to them and what they
Mhm.
say. In some cases, it's like one way. Sometimes you go right, sometimes you go left, and it doesn't seem to be very consistent. And
Mhm.
you can't blame the Sunday school teacher for that matter, or
Mhm.
the parent or anything, because it's not, there is no clear reference, if you will, or clear overarching message that
Mhm.
we as a church is following here.
So, and that's obviously very interesting points that you brought up. I think it's very important that when we see things like this, there's two things that we need to do as a congregation. I always say it's one, it's we have to humble ourselves, right? And accept that when the church makes a decision, there's wisdom in what it makes. But if I also see something that I think can be further improved, to make sure I speak out about it. So it's great that we're talking about this now. I think it's also important that we bring these issues up to our father of confession or the priest or whatever, so that they can bring it up to whoever they need to bring it up to maybe create some consistency, because that's how it always starts. Even with Nestorius, I remember, again, the story about him and how he was found out to be a heretic was what he was preaching. And he says, Mary is the mother of Jesus, not Christ. And he's going through a sermon, right? And then all of a sudden, one of the clergy members says, wait a second, I don't agree with this. Right? And then that's how it started, right? It's because one person said, this doesn't sound right. And so on. So this is great that you're saying this. Let's try to make sure we can try to implement this, because maybe you have a very good point about refresh. Maybe we need to start making a CPR related thing, and maybe that's something that we can implement later on in the future, but it's going to start with someone speaking out. So absolutely, I think that's a very valid point that you're bringing up. The only caveat I will mention is we're very fortunate we have servants here that are wanting to learn. It's not always the case with every single servant. So we need to make sure that we can also engage in the servants themselves, so that they want to get better, that they want to improve, or they want to, if they're willing to serve, they should be willing to also continue to work on their service. So I think that's also important as well. But yeah, absolutely. So let's keep going with the learning modes. So learning modes allow us to understand and teach through the senses. So the visual, the auditory, and the kinesthetic. So when we talk about that, there's this image that you guys have in your book. And you see that there's the different types of basically learning methods, or sorry, I say learning methods, learning modes. And when we get to it, you see that you can be not necessarily in one specific thing. You can have a mix of different things with your learning methods. So there's the concrete sequential, which is a reflective type. There's the concrete dynamic, which is activist. There's the abstract dynamic, which is a pragmatic, and abstract sequential, which is a theorist. So when we talk about the reflector, right, this is an idea person. So concrete sequential, so brings order to chaos, we always like to say. It's also known as innovative learners. So they always like to ask the why or why not. They always like to say, why is it like this? And again, part of it is understanding how they learn will help us with how we prepare ourselves too. So if I know I have someone who is a reflective person who likes to, be the concrete sequential, they might say, I need to know why. So I'm going to prepare this beforehand so that I know that if he asks this or she asks this, I have some kind of response I can give them that will satisfy them. When we talk about the theorists, so they're the analytical learners. So the ideas and concepts are put together in a logical way. And what is the most common question? So what are we doing? That's usually the most common question with the theorist or abstract sequential. Then we get to the pragmatists, and they're how the ideas and theories work in real life. we get a lot of youth that are more pragmatic nowadays, where it's like, oh, this is nice and all that you're saying, but how does it apply to me, right? And so they're common sense learners, and their favorite question is, so what? Right? So it's learning again, how do we respond to these so what? So how does this apply to me? And then finally, there's the activists. And their learning must be exciting all through, or learning must be exciting, and it's all through trial and error. So activity, physical kind of think about it. They need to, you know, touch the stove once, feel that it was hot, then they know that it's hot and I shouldn't touch it. So it's their favorite question is, if this happens, then what? Or what can this become later on if, you know, I do such and such an event? That's how they learn. So when we talk about the learning styles, these are some of the myths and facts. So all of us have a clear preference for learning styles. That is a myth. We don't, like, it's always usually a mix of all these. As we can see in all these different things that we've learned, everyone has different styles, right? Myth number 2 is everyone fits into one category, right? And like we said, you might have a few different categories that you fit in. Learning preferences do not change. And you actually mentioned this earlier, right? We're trained from a young age to remove that physical kinetic to become sit-down learners. So our learning preferences do change over time, and we can get better at one thing versus another, and we can actually train ourselves, just like how students can train themselves. We cannot learn in all styles. This is something I think, because we've been talking about tailoring it to each person, but the thing is, we can learn in any style. It's just saying that one style might be more beneficial to one person than the other. And this is where you also have to figure out what's the best way to get the most number of people. When you're working as preparing a lesson or whatever it is, it's what method am I going to use this time to really try to incorporate as many people as possible? And maybe next time I'll try a different method and I'll see the engagement and see what works best for this group. If it's not helpful to try, it is not helpful to try and learn in other styles. It is good for us to have some degree of exposure to other styles of learning. And this is for real world and for just in general with learning, because again, you might have been taught your whole life that you're a visual learner, but maybe all of a sudden you find out you're a linguistic learner, right? But that's because you've always been taught in a visual way. So again, these are all myths that we're finding out that aren't always true, but we make assumptions on it. And then all learners need to know their learning style. Again, you might not know what your learning style is, and it changes. I know for me personally, university was very difficult because I always thought I was a visual learner. And so once I got into pharmacy school, I realized I'm not a visual learner. And it's like, how do I study now? I completely forgot how to study all of a sudden. And it's trying to find a new style of learning. Teachers need to know their students' learning style. You might not know your students' learning style, and you're going to have to learn it as you go along. So you're finding what is engaging more, what is not engaging more. And some learning styles are better than others. Again, as we said, there's no one learning style that is best. It's whatever applies to the person, whatever works best for the person. And then it's impossible to program to meet all learning styles. And that's what we're going to talk about next, just the setting and the other parts of the laws of communication. But there is a way that we can try to, again, get the most positive reactions from everyone based on everything else that we learned. If you remember from the very beginning with this, right? So we just learned about basically the speaker, the student, the spirit, the subject, and the style. There's still structure, substance, stickability, setting, and speech. So there's still another 5 more that we're going to be learning over the next little while. So for the most of it, we're done. We're just going to do the last little bit as our case study. All right. So for those of you that weren't here the last couple of times, we've been working with these 3 students, we'll say, that are all in grade 11. And we've been trying to kind of, based on what we've learned, how we would approach them. So today we've been talking about laws of communication. So based on, and let's see, we have 2, and how many people do we have online? 1. Okay, very good. So what we'll do is we'll have you 2 work on the high achiever, so the very first point. And what I want you guys to go on is, based on his personality, how would you want to communicate with him? right? And just maybe some traits that you might notice. So would he be an apathetic learner? Would he be intrinsically motivated versus extrinsically motivated? Things like that. You two, you guys can go to the second person. The one who's not worried about being accepted by others. Same question. How do you want to approach with him? What kinds of communication do you want to approach him with? Kinds of motivators that he would have, and just how do I make sure he's engaged? And then for the one person online, you have the last person, and we'll discuss that all together. All right. Hopefully you can hear me, but you have the last person. All right. Oh, sorry, the slides are not there. So for the case study for Andrew, basically based on what we were learning, what I'd like you to do is, if you remember the last person, he's the one that is more introverted and enjoys playing video games. He socializes well in certain settings and values his friendship. And he will go to meetings if his specific group of friends are going, right? So I want to know basically from that, it's what kinds of, based on what we learned with the different types of communication, his motivators, and how would you want to start a presentation for him? Okay. So if you can just jot some points and then we can go over it afterwards. All right, thanks. Oh, and we have 10 minutes. All right, class. So we'll start going case by case now. And I guess since you guys are the first people, let's hear what you guys have.
So with the high achiever, it's always, these ones are always easy to motivate because we talk about they're very intrinsically motivated. So all you have to do is just give, like, if you want them to achieve what you want, you gotta just focus carrot, give the extrinsic motivation, and because they're so driven and competitive, they're just gonna run towards it because they're self-driven. The part that we were struggling with is the socially accepted part. Like, how do you, like, would you want them to be in a bigger group to show off or not? That's the part we're talking about. That's the interesting discussion, is that some people, some people are motivated but don't want to show off. Other people are motivated and want to show off, and it's very hard to figure that out just from this scenario. So we're having a discussion about that. How do you celebrate? Like, how do you motivate a high achiever who's competitive but shy and doesn't want to show off? And how do you do the other one? The other one's a little bit easier, who is high motivated achiever but also wants all the eyeballs on that person.
Very good. So what did you guys come to any conclusion for either one?
So like Mina had a good observation about this case. Like, you want to chat with?
Yeah, right.
Well, he thinks this person is more, because the social accepted part, they think they're actually more shy. So they think the chances are they probably wouldn't want to show off. They just want to achieve, but then keep it, just kind of stay. We talked about the nerd piece, like they to not be seen as like, oh, I'm the overachiever, I want to fit in. So they probably want to achieve it, but they don't want you to celebrate it. Like they say, hey, bravo, you did a good job.
So,
And I kind of agree, like he convinced me because I thought it wouldn't be that way, but I kind of agree with this kind of this setting.
okay, so if you're preparing like a topic or you want to engage that person, as you said,
Yeah.
how would you do
So it would be just kind of give it to them on a one-on-one, say, hey, take it, go home, achieve it, and come back and give it to us, and we won't show off, like, get you to stand up and present in front of the class.
Okay, that's fair.
So that's kind of where we settled, and I think like I agree with the arguments that he made for that. So I think that's probably the better approach here, as opposed to like, hey, here's this homework, do it, and then present it in front of the whole group, and then get all the fist bumps, which I think is incorrect here.
No, I really.
But it's hypothetical, so that's,
Of course,
yeah.
and one of the things
You have to
you'll
know the
learn.
person, yeah.
This is a very broad statement. You really need to know the student beforehand. So it's hard for me to say, go ahead and figure it out based off of the one thing. So you are making some assumptions. I know Mina always has some difficulties with these ones because they're like, what if this person? What if that person? Yeah. Right? He's the if that exactly. Analytical. There we go. So that's very good. So we know they're a high achiever. We never really talk about what kind of learner they are, but if they are a visual learner, for example, how would you want to prepare a lesson then?
Well, for the visual learner, you want to have slide deck, right?
So
And have
slide
that
deck.
fill in the blanks, questions.
Mhm.
And questions are like hard pop questions and get the either answer or one, right?
Very good.
It's a lot of but if it's a guy, then you might want to do the visual, or just give them like, here is a
Mhm.
key, take it home, or just bring it back on Sunday, and then you get it to start.
Okay. So question for you. Sorry.
No, I just want to ask in your experience with visual learning, found a slide deck is sufficient, or you need something like a whiteboard or having like draw stuff and you just open them, put it down,
So you kind of touched on what I was going to ask next. What if they're a kinetic learner? So visual learners, a lot of times imagery is the best thing that you can do for them. So showing them the PowerPoint, maybe a video, something like that will always help them to really understand it best. The one thing I would avoid obviously is just talking, right? But I was going to ask if they're a kinetic learner, how would you want to take care of that? And you kind of touched on it, where it's like, let's have an activity board, or let's, have them actually do something. Because grade 11, it's very hard, because when I always thought of kinetic, I think of, again, the grade 1 kid that wants to act out and do this and that and that, but that might not apply for a grade 11 person, right? They might not want to act out or do something. They might not, but
I do a lot of teaching myself, and I found if I put a graph on the screen,
Mhm.
people lose
interest.
interest in a graph and a slide.
Mhm.
But you keep the slide, don't get
Yeah.
me wrong, but I found having a whiteboard next to it and kind of like draw the
Drawing
graph
it out.
as you speak about it and where you're getting with everything, people actually get it.
Okay, that's very
Uh,
interesting.
Again, I'm not teaching
Yeah.
younger generation, I'm like dealing with older people. And I found like even like the visual person getting just one slide,
Mhm.
they lose interest, especially with others that
Mhm.
15 minutes talking to you from.
Yeah.
So I found having the whiteboard, the flip chart, which are tools I've never seen in some
Yeah.
would be helpful. In cases like this.
Okay. Very good.
What I really found interesting is the immersion situation. So,
Mhm.
I think we can
Mhm.
think about actually moves with the stuff like
Mhm.
very like it's very immersive and shows them exactly what happened.
Mhm.
Give them the
So very interesting. You mentioned about the experience, right? Giving them an actual experience might really help. And I think it would apply to all of them, right? Like giving them some kind of experience that they would feel do, that might be very good. How about in terms of the teaching methods? Remember from the very beginning, we were talking about laws of communication. There were like 3 different styles, right? Do you remember what the 3 were? Do you guys have any memory? When we were just talking about the very beginning, the 3 laws of communication. Or sorry, not 3 laws, just the laws of communication. So we're talking about Christian ministry. There's preaching, teaching, facilitating, right? So for someone like that ultra high achiever, what kind of ministry would probably be best for them, do you think? Facilitating.
They want to already high thinking, they don't want to be
Mhm.
condescending, you want to be involved.
Very good. How about you guys? Do you agree or would you?
might be after as well, like high achievers are like
Mm.
listen
Mm.
because it's like they always like to have a
Yeah.
and have a one exactly pinpoint of
I know I agree with you on that as well. So what I'm trying to get at is obviously Christian ministry means that you're doing a mix of all of these realistically, right? So maybe there's a time for that facilitating in a group discussion, and that's going to really help them. There might be points in time where you need to, train them, like you said, if they're like an athlete, where they need some kind of one-on-one explanations, or maybe you need to preach to them because they're kind of like veering off the wrong direction. You need to bring them back. So you need to have a strong, harsh one-on-one, and maybe that applies to them or that works for them, right? But the idea is your ministry will have to have all three of them at some point in time. It's you can't do just one without the others. You need to have them all. It wants to be a complete Christian ministry, right? And we even see it with Jesus, right? In his ministry, there's been times where he does facilitate in his discussions, right? Where he's trying to lead to a point, and he'll be asking questions, right? Who did the person forgive more? He'll give a story, and then whom did the person forgive more? We go to the teaching where he will give, a very specific training, and this is what you need to do, and A, B, C, D, E, right? And there's other times where he's preaching or giving a 5-minute conversation, or it's just a quick message that he's trying to say. It can be by his actions. So all of it is to say that we have to do all of it together. And obviously the best example is Jesus always. Oh no, went too far. Yeah. Sorry, there you go. So that was good for the first person. Thank you. And how about the second person?
Can I see that? So we said, given that they're not worried about being accepted and they're knowledgeable about the trends and they're popular there, the best way to get them engaged is to, because they're not focusing on what's being said, let them share what they know. So asking them, okay, so and so, please let us know what you think about this kind of thing. Giving them an opportunity so that they have the floor to share their knowledge, because if you're looking about, their interpersonal and their intelligence, where they might like teaching others. And that being said, once they've shared their point of view, sharing that positive reinforcement, great insight, whatever it might be, and then, but you might have looked at it this way, or you might have added this, kind of completing what they missed. So you've reinforced them positively so that they feel good about themselves, and that will also help them to focus on what you're saying now. Like, I have shared my piece and it was well received by the servant, by the teachers. And now I'm going to be, oh, okay, I'm going to listen to what they have to say now in response to me. Yeah, that was it. Yeah.
I really like what you mentioned. I think it would have been great for this one person had that happen more. I think they would have been a lot more involved in the church had that happen. And to be honest, when I look at that, you really struck it on the point where when we're looking at the needs of the person, remember, it's the needs are what they want to learn versus what they already know. So this was a good way of kind of getting them involved. And then you've also made them, I guess, committed to it by giving your points of view. Now you're committed to what you've said. So, you're not worried about being accepted by others, but also you've invested now some of your thoughts. And that's something that can be very important for people, right? Because now I've invested in this. I want to know how it ends, or I want to know what's going to happen next week, or this and that. Or is the teacher going to ask me again? I want to be a little better prepared maybe for next time, so I look even smarter, or whatever it is, right? So that definitely that's a very good way of kind of presenting that information, where it's let's get them involved, let's get them engaged first. Maybe not necessarily giving them all the spotlight, or if you are giving them some of the spotlight, you're also positively encouraging them. And I think we talked about this a couple of weeks ago, where you don't want to, give them negative feedback after putting the spotlight on, because then they might not want to come back at all. So I like how you kind of said, I'm gonna give them some positive feedback after they give the talk, and then they're invested a little bit more. When they're invested, they have some skin in the game, and they might not want to leave, or they might want to focus a bit more on what's being said. I like that. Any comments you want to add to that, guys? Or no? Perfect. And then the last person. So Andrew, he was mentioning with the last person, because video games are sorry. So being into video games may indicate that he's a visual learner, and so try to make the lesson that involves some kind of illustrations to keep him engaged. There also, video games are related with rewards, which could suggest that he has extrinsic motivation, which I thought that was very interesting. He's also only comfortable in certain settings, so will be a little tough to be easily engaged only because the topic is enjoyable. So he's kind of looking more so at the extrinsic rewards. Group discussions with people he is comfortable with may be a good way to deliver a point across. And I like that idea of grouping him with friends, grouping him with people he's comfortable with to make sure that he is learning. Because end of the day, I know we always say it's not what they've learned, but how they felt afterwards. But we also want to make sure that if we're doing something, we can have them come out with at least that lesson of the week. So they might have learned something at least. So yeah, maybe how I'm going to teach him is I want to do more group things where he's not the spotlight, he's not the center of the attention, but at the same time, he's able to discuss with the people that he likes. And, there could be some points that he brings up or some points that, he stays quiet in, but he listens. So, and I think that's very important with the introverts. They don't always need to be, we don't always need to have group discussions with them, but sometimes group discussions allows them to kind of hide in the group, but they're still participating. So they're still making the friendships, they're still connecting, they're still able to. I always joke around, my wife, she's introverted to an extent, but all her friends are super extroverted. And I don't understand how this works. And until I realize what happens is she listens in on the conversation, she'll make her 1 or 2 points, and it works out great because she feels involved without actually being the center of attention. So there's ways of getting people that are introverted involved and feeling engaged and motivated. I know we just passed the 6 o'clock mark, so thank you everyone for being here with us, and we will see you guys next week. Thank you. What's their attendance?